All right, let's jump right in. We're going to be talking about two of the Victorian era's most powerful, most prophetic voices. We'll explore how one man, forged in, fire and a sense of duty, and another, shaped by beauty and light, came together to challenge their entire society to, well, find its soul. This quote really gets to the heart of what both of these guys believed. For them, things like morality, work, and beauty, they weren't separate boxes. They were all deeply, deeply connected. And they argued that when a society loses that connection, it loses its soul. It becomes this kind of hollowed-out machine, all about utility and nothing else. I mean, you have to picture the world they were living in. It was just changing at this dizzying pace. You've got the Industrial Revolution creating incredible wealth, sure, but also unbelievable poverty and this nagging feeling that something really important was being lost in the process. So people were starting to ask, okay, in this new age of machines and money, what does it even mean to live a good life anymore? And right into the middle of all this chaos step our two guys, Thomas Carlyle and John Ruskin. Now, these guys weren't writing novels or poems to entertain people. No way. They used nonfiction prose like a weapon. Really, they wrote with the fire and passion of prophets, basically forcing everyone around them to look at the moral cost of all this so-called progress. Okay, first step. Let's get into the world of the fiery, let's say prickly, and incredibly influential Thomas Carlyle. To really get these two, you have to look at where they came from. It's like night and day. Carlyle's world? It was all about stone, duty, and just plain hardship in rural Scotland. Ruskin, on the other hand, grew up with wealth, fine art, and grand tours of Europe. And trust me, these very different beginnings became the absolute bedrock of their entire philosophies. So Carlyle's life was pretty much defined by struggle. His super strict upbringing gave him this ironclad sense of duty. But then, he goes to university and loses his faith, which just throws him into this massive spiritual crisis. And it was this personal battle against despair that really fueled his life's work. He became this ferocious critic of what was called laissez-faire capitalism, the whole idea that the market should just be left alone to do its thing. To Carlyle, that was a recipe for a totally morally bankrupt society. And this struggle, this is what led to his great breakthrough. After wrestling with what he called the everlasting no, which is this bleak, godless, materialistic void, Carlyle finally arrives at the everlasting yea. And that was his answer. It was this powerful belief that even if you've lost your traditional faith, you can still find meaning. You can find purpose through heroic action and just plain old hard work. All right, now let's pivot to our second visionary, the elegant and you could say morally obsessed John Ruskin. He saw the same crisis, but he offered a very different way out. So yeah, Ruskin's journey was totally different. He was raised on two things, the Bible and fine art. This gave him an almost religious devotion to beauty. He starts out as this brilliant art critic, but then he reads Carlyle, and it triggers this massive epiphany. He realizes, wait a minute, I can't just talk about beautiful paintings while the society that's making them is ugly and unjust. That changed everything for him. So, how did these two very different men tackle the crisis of their time? Well, let's take a look at the powerful ideas they brought to the fight. When you look at Carlyle's major works, his style is just explosive. It's volcanic. I mean, you read his book on the French Revolution, and he makes you feel like you're literally right there in the middle of the chaos. His big themes, he's constantly attacking mammonism, which is basically the worship of money, and he's always calling for strong, heroic leaders and celebrating the moral goodness of honest work. Ruskin's style, though, totally different. It's lyrical, it's precise. He starts off arguing that great art shows us the truth in nature, then he applies that same idea to architecture, and then finally, he applies it to economics itself. And in his book, Unto This Last, he just drops a bomb on Victorian capitalism. He declared that the goal of an economy shouldn't be profit. It should be life. The only true wealth, he said, is life itself. What an idea! And this next idea, this is where it all comes together. In a famous chapter called The Nature of Gothic, Ruskin argues that the so-called flaws you see in medieval cathedrals are actually beautiful. Why? Because they're the signs of a free human hand at work. A perfectly smooth, machine-made object for him was basically a sign of human slavery. So for Ruskin, the quality of a thing was completely inseparable from the happiness and well-being of the person who made it. So you see, even though they were fighting the exact same battle, this war against a soulless mechanical age, their voices couldn't have been more different. Carlyle was like a thunderstorm, right? Just roaring warnings and prophecies. Ruskin, though, he was more like a clear, powerful river, carefully carving out new paths with his beautiful descriptions and moral force. Okay, so why should we care? Why are we still talking about two guys from the Victorian era today? Well, because their legacy is so much bigger than just a couple of dusty old books. Let's take a look at their incredible impact. Before then, writers were mostly seen as entertainers or maybe just people who recorded facts. But Carlyle and Ruskin, they basically invented a new job description: the public intellectual as the moral conscience of the nation. They showed that you could use the power of language to really guide and challenge an entire society on its biggest problems. And the ripple effect was just immense. I mean, they directly influenced the great novelists of the day, like Dickens and George Eliot. Ruskin's ideas kicked off huge art movements like the Pre-Raphaelites. And here's the craziest part. His book on economics, Unto This Last, was read and translated by Mahatma Gandhi, who literally credited it with changing his life and his entire political philosophy. Just wow. When you boil it all down, this was their shared conviction. They both fiercely believed that art and writing had a much higher purpose than just being pretty decorations. For Carlyle and for Ruskin, it was never about art for art's sake. It was about art for life's sake. It was a powerful tool meant to create real, meaningful social change. And that kind of leaves us with a big question, doesn't it? Carlyle and Ruskin used the cutting-edge technology of their day, the printed page, to speak truth to power. So, in our own age of social media, AI, and just constant digital noise, it really makes you wonder, who are our prophets today? Who are the voices cutting through all that noise? And maybe more importantly, are we even listening?